In 1958, America was living the dream of the future. The roads were ruled by chrome cars with huge fins, rock and roll poured from the radios, and the space race with the Soviet Union had the entire nation gazing at the stars with bated breath. In the quiet town of Harmony Creek, Indiana, 10-year-old Arthur Collins was more than just a spectator of this race. He was its devoted fan. His room was filled with model rockets and star charts, and his well-read science fiction magazines promised worlds beyond human imagination. On the evening of August 21, 1958, Arthur was, as usual, in his backyard with his Tasco telescope, a birthday gift. He was aiming it at Jupiter, trying to spot its famous moons. And then, he simply vanished. His parents only noticed he was missing an hour later when his mother called him in for the night. An empty chair, an overturned telescope, and the ringing silence of an August night. The search, which involved the whole town, yielded no results for nearly 5 hours. Just as the sheriff was preparing to call for backup from the next county, Arthur reappeared. He was standing in the middle of his own yard, barefoot, his pajamas damped with dew, staring at the sky with empty eyes. The story he told shattered the peace not only of his family, but of all of Harmony Creek. He didn't speak of a kidnapper in a car, but of a pillar of soft, warm light that descended silently from the sky and lifted him up. He described a vast round room with no corners, bathed in a smooth white light, and tall, slender beings with large, almond-shaped eyes who communicated with him without words, directly inside his mind. They weren't scary, he said, but rather curious, like scientists studying a rare insect. In the America of the late 1950s, obsessed with spy mania and the fear of the communist threat, there was no place for such a story. The sheriff quickly closed the case, dismissing it as a fabrication or a vivid nightmare. The family doctor found no signs of violence on Arthur's body, only 3 tiny, perfectly straight dots at the base of his spine, which he attributed to an unknown insect bite. For Arthur, hell had begun. At school, they taunted him as Arthur the Martian. Children would cross the street to avoid him. His parents, worn down by the sideways glances of neighbors and their own shame, took him to a psychologist. The specialist's verdict was predictable. Childhood hysteria, influenced by cheap science fiction magazines, and possibly a hidden family trauma that the child had projected into such a complex fantasy. The more Arthur tried to prove his story, drawing from memory the star maps he had seen on board and the faces of his abductors, the stronger the wall of alienation became. Finally, his own father, a war veteran and a respected man in town, in a moment of desperation, ordered him to stop lying. On that day, 10-year-old Arthur understood that he was completely alone, and so he fell silent. But he never forgot. The subsequent 30 years of Arthur Collins's life were quiet and unremarkable. He never again spoke of what had happened to him. He was a good student, excelling particularly in physics and mathematics. After high school, he went to Purdue University to study engineering, earned his degree, and got a job at a large telecommunications company. He got married, and he had a daughter. From the outside, he was the embodiment of the American dream, an ordinary, dependable, hard-working man. But he had a second, secret life. In the basement of his house, he built a laboratory. All his savings, all his free time were spent on his research. He wasn't trying to find UFOs. He operated on the assumption that his experience was real, and therefore it had to obey the laws of physics, even if they were unknown to humanity. He studied radio astronomy, quantum mechanics, and metallurgy. He became a self-taught expert in fields his work colleagues knew nothing about. Using his knowledge, he came to a startling conclusion. The beings who took him had not told him when they would return, but they had shown him a map. And this map contained not only their home system, but also trajectories governed by the complex gravitational interactions of several star systems. It wasn't just a map, it was a schedule,
Arthur spent nearly 20 years deciphering this data using the first personal computers and creating his own programs for the calculations. And he figured out the date. The window, when the gravitational pathways would align again, was set to open in the late summer of 1988. In August 1988, a 40-year-old Arthur Collins took a vacation from work, telling his family he was going fishing. Instead, he drove to the Black Rock Desert in Nevada, to the exact spot his calculations had pinpointed. He brought a van full of equipment, spectrometers, high-resolution cameras, Geiger counters, and gravimeters. He was not wrong. On the appointed night, it all happened again, but this time, he was not a frightened child, but a prepared researcher. He did not make contact. He recorded. He documented the emission spectrum of the ship's propulsion, which contradicted everything known to terrestrial science. He recorded a local curvature of space-time around the object, and when the ship departed, a small gift was left behind on the fused sand where it had hovered. An object left for him. 2 weeks later, Arthur Collins walked into the reception area at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was calm and businesslike. He requested a meeting with leading specialists in materials physics and astrophysics. When he was received with skepticism, he silently opened his briefcase and placed 3 items on the table that were about to change the world. The first piece of evidence was the object from the desert. It was a smooth, dark metal rod about the size of his palm. Its analysis threw the lab into a state of shock. The material had the density of osmium but was as light as aluminum. Its atomic structure was crystalline but was composed of stable isotopes of elements that, on Earth, could only exist for fractions of a second inside particle accelerators. It was warm to the touch, constantly maintaining a temperature of 36.6 degrees Celsius or 97.9 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the surrounding environment, violating the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. This was technology that was thousands, if not millions, of years ahead of Earth's. The second piece of evidence was Arthur himself. He presented his medical records and requested that a sample of bone tissue be taken from his spine. In the exact spot where the doctor had found insect bites in 1958, a microscopic implant made of the same impossible material as the rod was discovered. It had been integrated into his bone and, as it turned out, had been emitting an extremely faint but constant subatomic signal for 30 years, a beacon. But the ultimate proof was the decryption of this signal. It was not just a pulse, it was an incredibly complex compressed data packet. It took the leading cryptographers and programmers at MIT several months and the power of a Cray 2 supercomputer to crack it. The contents of that packet became the greatest discovery in human history. It was a beginner's guide, the basic principles of physics describing the control of gravity, a schematic for an engine that ran on the zero-point energy of the vacuum, and a detailed map of the nearby galactic sectors showing dozens of life-sustaining planets. At the end, there was a simple message, transmitted in the form of universal mathematical constants. You are not alone. When you can build this, you can join the dialogue. We are waiting. News of this magnitude was impossible to contain. After the initial leak and the government's attempts to classify everything, the truth flooded out, triggering a global chain reaction. Stock markets crashed and then soared to unprecedented heights. Religious leaders issued emergency statements trying to fit this new knowledge into old doctrines. The Cold War, still simmering between the USSR and the USA, instantly seemed like a childish squabble in a sandbox. For the first time, humanity was faced with irrefutable proof that it was just a small part of a vast, intelligent cosmos, and that it had just been handed the key to the front door. Arthur Collins, the boy nobody believed, became the most famous and simultaneously the most private person on the planet. He refused all interviews, awards, or honors. He handed over all his research and the artifact to an international scientific group and returned home to Indiana. His mission was complete. For 30 years, he had carried the burden of truth alone. Now, that truth belonged to all of humanity, and he no longer had to prove anything. He just wanted to spend the rest of his life with his family. And sometimes at night, he would go out into his backyard, look up at the stars, and for the first time in many years, feel not loneliness, but boundless hope.